Monday mornings weren't supposed to feel like this. Usually, they began with coffee gone cold before the first sip, a half-eaten protein bar, and a sea of work emails I could ignore until my second cup. But this morning started with something else entirely. I was halfway through sorting logistics for a medical symposium when the subject line popped up on my screen. Bold, cheerful, and completely gutting. Brooks Family Beach Week 2025, RSVP now. My breath caught. I clicked before I could stop myself. Everyone was CC'd. Trinity, Bryce, Aunt Mel, even Cousin Darren, who'd been MIA since the Clinton administration. But my name not there, not in the thread, not in the original list, not even as a typo. They hadn't just forgotten me. I wasn't included at all. I stared at the screen like it had slapped me. There they were, dozens of replies, little quips, memories from last year. Someone even posted a photo of the fire pit at sunset, the same fire pit where I'd roasted marshmallows at age 8 before I knew that love in this family came with terms and expiration dates. I scrolled lower, hoping stupidly for a second email, a correction, anything. But I already knew better. This wasn't the first time. Last year's invite must have gone to spam, Trinity had said when I called her crying. You know how tech can be? She'd added with a chuckle, as if erasing me from the family calendar was a software glitch. I closed the thread and sat there. My office suddenly felt too big, too sterile. The framed senior VP nomination letter on my wall looked like it belonged to someone else. The sunlight bouncing off the Santa Monica skyline felt like a cruel joke, California warmth with a cold void in my chest. I turned to my bookshelf almost unconsciously, and there it was, the turquoise glass seashell. It sat on the second shelf behind outdated industry manuals and a neglected jade plant. A birthday gift from when I was 10. My dad had picked it up at a roadside antique store and told me it looked like something special for his special girl. That was before he started calling Trinity his pride, before he began introducing me to his friends as the one who's always busy with work. Before I learned that being the youngest didn't mean being loved more, it just meant being useful longer. You okay? I jumped. Remington was standing by my desk, holding his mug of oversteeped green tea. I swallowed. Yeah, just a spam email. He raised an eyebrow. From them again? I didn't answer, just offered a tight-lipped smile and went back to my laptop. But I didn't reopen the symposium document. Instead, I shut the laptop completely. The promotion packet was still on my desk. Senior Vice President at 38, the youngest candidate in the firm's history. I had survived boardroom politics, 12-hour days, and being overlooked by men with fewer ideas and more golf trophies. And yet, none of that mattered. Not to them. To them, I was the one who moved too far, worked too much, and forgot her roots. My phone buzzed. A text from Savannah. Saw the invite. Wanna crash it just for laughs. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, or maybe it's time I did something smarter. The family beach house, the place where we'd spent every summer until I was 18, where Trinity took her maternity photos, where my parents toasted their 30th anniversary while I was at a conference they'd forgotten to even tell me about the event. It was there that the first major rift happened, 12 years ago. I'd just landed my first executive position at Peterson and Walcott. The same weekend was Cousin Jamie's wedding. I'd told them months in advance I couldn't attend because of a major presentation. Your career will always be there, Mom had said, disappointment dripping from every syllable. Family comes first. But I wasn't just building a career. I was escaping the shadow I'd lived in my entire life, Trinity's shadow. Beautiful, agreeable Trinity who married young, had 3 kids, and lived 15 minutes from our parents. Trinity, who never missed a family event because she had nothing else to pursue. It's just a job, Dad had added. Family is forever. I went to the presentation instead of the wedding, landed the promotion, called excitedly to tell them. Mom answered with ice in her voice. That's nice, dear. Trinity's baby has colic. I need to go. That was the beginning of the end. After that, invitations became sporadic, then stopped altogether. Phone calls dwindled. When I did manage to visit, conversations revolved around Trinity's children or Nelson's latest business venture, never about my achievements or my life. I opened my laptop again and typed Brooks Family Beach House into the search bar. My breath caught when the result appeared. There it was, listed for sale quietly through a boutique real estate agency. No family announcement, no group chat message. The market had dipped, and they were offloading it like old furniture. I stared at the listing, the wraparound porch, the view of the water, the same chairs where I'd once listened to my dad read Steinbeck aloud before he started pretending he couldn't hear my calls. My finger hovered over contact agent, then clicked. The confirmation email from the realtor hadn't even sunk in when my phone rang. Same ringtone I'd assigned to her years ago. Same feeling in my chest tight. Expectant, resigned. I knew it was her. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Mom, I said flatly, already bracing. Kaya, dear, she began, using that voice, that sugary sing-song tone she pulled out when she was about to do something she knew would hurt, but wanted to sound polite while doing it. I didn't wait for the rest. Let me guess. Trinity's kids need the bunk room again. Or maybe Nelson's new girlfriend is allergic to hotel pillows. There was silence long enough for me to imagine her blinking at her perfectly manicured nails, searching for the next line in her script. Then finally, she said, You know how chaotic it gets with little ones, and we're just limited in space this year. I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. I could have written her dialogue for her. You understand, don't you, Kaya? She added gently, almost pitifully. It's just logistics. I remembered that same phrase from 2 years ago. Same time of year, same voice. The last time I tried to attend, she had called me the day before, whispering apologies like confessions in a booth. You understand, don't you? She'd said then, too. The little ones need the bunk room. I understand perfectly, I said now. Thanks for the heads up. Before she could respond, I ended the call. But I didn't throw my phone. I didn't cry. I didn't scream into a pillow. I simply got up, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water with the steadiness of someone who'd known this was coming. Back at my desk, my phone lit up again. This time it was Savannah. Screenshot incoming. She never sent a text without warning me first. I opened the image. It was from a group chat I wasn't in. Of course I wasn't. Trinity. Don't worry. Kaya said she's not coming again. Wants to make it about herself as usual. Then came the reactions. A few oh no texts, some laughing emojis. One from Uncle Jack. That girl needs therapy. I stared at it, numb, but underneath the numbness was something else. Not rage, not sadness, clarity. They weren't just omitting me. They were rewriting me, turning absence into blame, muting my voice, then filling the silence with their own version of who I was. To them, I murmured, I'm a shadow who abandoned the light. But I knew the truth. I hadn't walked away from warmth. I had escaped the cold. I opened the real estate app again and scrolled to the beach house listing. No hesitation this time. I scheduled a private appointment with the realtor for the next day. No one needed to know. The beachfront real estate office was a sleek blue glass building nestled between a surf shop and a boutique cafe. A woman with graying curls and a lavender scarf stood from behind the desk. You must be Kaya, she said warmly. I was told you'd come by today. I nodded. Thanks for fitting me in. She gestured to a chair. Funny thing, she said as she pulled up the listing on her tablet. Your name sounds familiar. Are you related to the current owners? I looked her straight in the eyes. Yes, but not for long, I hope. As she explained the details of the listing, I learned that my parents were selling due to financial restructuring. The house had been on the market for 3 weeks. With minimal interest due to the market downturn, the asking price was 15% below market value. They needed a quick sale. Is there a reason your family didn't involve you in the sale? She asked, eyebrow raised. Let's just say, communication isn't our strong suit. I replied. After reviewing the details and taking a virtual tour, I thanked her and promised to consider the property, but my mind was already made up. I just needed to check one more thing first. The scent of dust and concrete was oddly grounding as I stepped into the narrow hallway of the storage facility. Unit 43B. I hadn't opened it in nearly 5 years. The lock clicked open. I pushed the roll-up door upward, its metal teeth groaning in protest. Inside were pieces of a life I'd shed. My first apartment's furniture, boxes labeled college, a crate of books from my early career. In the far corner sat the old cedar trunk my grandmother's. I pulled it forward and brushed off the film of time that coated it. The latch was stiff, but it gave way with a determined tug. Inside, the familiar scent of lavender sachets she used to keep in her dresser drawers. My throat tightened. The first thing I saw was the journal ocean blue with seashells glued to the corners in her unmistakably clumsy pattern. I used to tease her about it. They'll fall off in a week, I'd said once, and she'd smiled. Then you'll have to glue your own truth to it. Underneath was a sealed envelope addressed in her slanted script. For Kaya. Open only when you stop looking for permission. I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor and opened it. Inside was a letter and a set of legal papers. The letter was short, just a few lines. One day you'll understand why I left this just for you. Love doesn't always come from those who raise us. Sometimes it finds its way through the cracks. Use this when the silence becomes unbearable. The legal papers were not a sudden trust document as I might have imagined, but something else entirely, an old family agreement. When the beach house was purchased 25 years ago, my grandmother had contributed the majority of the down payment with one condition: the house would eventually belong to me upon my 30th birthday, or if my parents failed to meet their financial obligations related to the property. I was now 38. 8 years past the stated date. I read and reread the document. It was signed by my parents, my grandmother, and notarized properly. I remembered my grandmother talking about a special arrangement when I was younger, but I'd never known the details. Now I understood why she'd always told me to keep my eye on that house. It'll be your anchor someday, she'd said. By the time I walked into the law offices of McCarran and Wells in Newport Beach the next morning, I was already 5 steps ahead of where I had been just days ago. This agreement, said Mr. Wells, tapping the yellowed document, is certainly valid, though executing it will be complex. He was a partner in his 60s with glasses perched low on his nose and decades of family law experience. Your grandmother was thorough, he continued. The conditional transfer clause is legally binding, but we'll need to verify whether your parents have indeed defaulted on their tax obligations, as you suspect. If they have, combined with the fact that they've exceeded the timeline for transfer by 8 years, we have a strong case. How long will the process take, I asked. To verify their tax status, potentially a week or two. To execute the full transfer if contested, that could take months. However, he raised a finger. There's another route. You could simply purchase the property outright as any buyer would. Based on what you've shared, they're motivated to sell quickly. I considered this. What if I do both? Put down a deposit to secure the house and prevent others from buying it, while simultaneously pursuing the legal verification of my rights under the agreement. He smiled. Hedging your bets. Smart. We can help you structure that approach, but be prepared for resistance once your family realizes what's happening. I nodded, a strange calmness washing over me. I've been prepared for their resistance my entire life. Mr. Wells. This time, I have something they don't the truth in writing. Are you sure about this? Savannah asked, swirling her wine glass. We sat on my balcony overlooking the city lights, the evening breeze carrying the faint scent of jasmine. It's not about revenge, I said after a moment. It's about reclaiming something that was meant to be mine. It's about all those summers when I built sandcastles that Trinity took credit for. It's about belonging somewhere that matters to me. As Savannah nodded slowly. They'll fight you, especially Trinity. That house is her backdrop for every Instagram post. Let them fight, I said quietly. I'm tired of disappearing. We spent the next hour mapping out the strategy. I would place a deposit on the house through conventional means, while Mr. Wells verified the tax payment history. Savannah would continue to feed me information from the family group chats. Most importantly, I would say nothing to anyone until the pieces were in place. When will you tell them? She asked finally. I looked out at the horizon, where the city met the darkening sky. When they can't pretend I don't exist anymore. The cemetery was quiet, just the whisper of wind through the cypress trees. Her marker sat nestled between two small rose bushes. Hey, Grandma, I said softly, sitting beside her grave on the still warm grass. They're doing it again. You'd roll your eyes so hard. I'd brought a single scoop of lavender honey ice cream in a sugar cone, our tradition. I placed it in front of her nameplate. You once told me not to raise my voice, just raise my value. I whispered. I did. I really did. A few minutes passed. I didn't cry, but I didn't smile either. The quiet had a way of holding you still, like she used to without words. Just presence. That kind of stillness doesn't come from peace. It comes from knowing who you are, even when everyone else tries to define you for their convenience. As I stood to leave, my phone pinged with an email from Mr. Wells. The subject line read, "Verification complete. Proceed." I opened it quickly. The tax records showed exactly what I'd suspected. My parents had fallen behind on property taxes 3 years ago, right around the time Nelson's third business venture had folded. They'd made only partial payments since, enough to avoid foreclosure, but not enough to fulfill their obligations under the agreement. I replied with 2 words, proceed immediately. From my rented convertible parked on the overlook, I could see the beach house perfectly. The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shadows across the sand. Cars had been arriving for the past hour, Trinity's white Audi, Nelson's oversized SUV with the tinted windows, and finally, my mother's aging sedan, still bearing the faded Proud Grandma sticker on the bumper. They didn't see me. They never really had. I watched them unload luggage with a flurry of laughter and purposeful motion. Their voices echoed down the breezeway, distorted by the salty air. I waited, gave them just enough time to walk into what used to be theirs. Then I drove forward slowly. As I approached the main reception, I could see Trinity already at the desk, animated, gesturing wildly. Nelson leaned against the marble counter like he owned the place, and my mother stood behind them with that familiar pursed expression, equal parts judgment and denial. I stepped inside, heels clicking against the cool tile. just as the young woman behind the desk asked again politely, "So you're not on Miss Kaya Gellhorn's guest list?" Trinity's face twisted. "Excuse me, I don't care what system you're looking at. This is our family's house. We've been coming here for over 20 years." The receptionist's eyes flicked to mine. She blinked once, twice, then offered the faintest smile. "Oh, Miss Gellhorn, welcome." I was just explaining. "I heard." I stepped beside Trinity without even looking at her. "There's no need to escalate. I'll clarify things." Nelson straightened. "What is this? Kaya, some prank. You really think this is funny?" "I think it's overdue." I handed my ID to the receptionist. "The deed transfer initiated 3 weeks ago. The house is mine." The silence that followed was not the kind that waits for someone to speak. It was the kind that shatters the floor beneath you. My mother clutched her purse tighter. You, you bought it. That's impossible." "No, Mom," I said gently, but not softly. "It's legal, it's clean, and it's final. You should have checked the mail or the agreement Grandma left. The one you signed." Trinity turned a shade I'd only ever seen on wilted roses. "Why would you do this? You knew we were planning the reunion. This was meant to be our space. And I was meant to be your daughter, your sister," I replied evenly. "But you left me off every email, every invite, every photo. So I found my own way in." Nelson barked out a laugh, the kind that masked panic. "You think you can just kick us out? You think you've won something?" I turned to him slowly. "No, Nelson, I think I reclaimed something. That's different." Then I looked at the desk clerk and said calmly, "Please help anyone not listed under my guest registry find alternative accommodations. Be kind. Of course, they're family." A beat of hesitation passed. Then she nodded and picked up the phone to call the concierge, not urgent, just standard, like this was any normal check-in process. "I'll contest this," Trinity muttered. "You'll hear from our lawyer." "You might want to review the clause on defaulted taxes first," I replied, still facing forward. "You might be surprised by how much was already in motion before you even clicked send on your guest list." My mother stepped forward then, voice quiet. "You really hate us that much?" I turned for a moment. I let the silence linger. Then I said what needed to be said, not cruelly, not bitterly, just honestly. "I don't hate you. I just stopped hoping you'd change." With that, I walked toward the elevator, the sound of their confusion dissolving behind me like salt and wind. As the doors slid closed, I felt my breath slow, not in relief, but in readiness. Because what came next wasn't silence. It was war. Yawan. I had just finished making tea in the quiet of the kitchen when the knock came not on my door, but on the glass window facing the beach. Not the kind of knock from a guest or neighbor. This one came with the blinding pulse of a news van's headlights behind it. A man with a microphone in hand and that greasy camera-ready smile was already positioning himself toward the lens. I stepped closer, pulling the curtain slightly. "Miss Gellhorn, can you confirm whether you coerced your elderly father into signing over the family property? Sources say he wasn't of sound mind." I didn't answer, not with words. I closed the door and walked away. By the time I reached the living room, my phone was vibrating with fury. Texts from former neighbors, co-workers, a cousin I hadn't heard from since our grandmother's funeral. Is any of this true? And then the email, temporary injunction notice. Occupancy of 404 Ocean Crest Boulevard must cease immediately pending court review. And the cherry on top, a screenshot Savannah forwarded Trinity's latest social media post. "A woman who turns on her own family was never raised with love to begin with. I pray for her soul." Underneath were comments filled with fire emojis, sad face reactions, and "so sorry" notes from people who hadn't known my name until yesterday. I stared at it all, the phone in my hand, the headlines forming without me. I should have been prepared, but nothing quite prepares you for being publicly labeled a predator, especially by people who once kissed your scraped knees and braided your hair. I didn't cry immediately. I sat down in the stillness of the master suite and looked across the room at a framed photograph I hadn't packed away yet, me at 7 clinging to my father's leg, both of us laughing so hard the photo came out blurred. A time before silence replaced softness. Was I that same girl? Would he even recognize me now? The tears came then, but they didn't belong to sadness. They belonged to a grief that had matured into something older, something tired. We need to move quickly, Mr. Wells said over the phone the next morning. They're claiming your father was manipulated and that you took advantage of his declining mental state. My father doesn't have a declining mental state, I said. He's 67 and runs 5 miles every morning. He's the CFO of a manufacturing company. They're also claiming the agreement with your grandmother was invalid, that she pressured them when they were young parents in financial distress. I took a deep breath. What do we need? Everything. The original agreement, proof of their tax delinquency, and any evidence of your systematic exclusion from family events. The court date is set for next Friday. When I hung up, Savannah was already at my door with a flash drive and a grim expression. I've been collecting receipts for years, she said, stepping inside. Every group chat where they talked about deliberately not inviting you, every email thread where they rewrote history. She plugged in the drive and opened a folder labeled Brooks Family Reunion Planning. Inside were dozens of screenshots, text messages, and email threads, all revealing a pattern of deliberate exclusion going back years. One email from Trinity to my mother, dated 3 years ago. Remember to create a separate thread for the real planning. Kaya gets too dramatic if she feels left out, so better not to include her at all. My mother's response? Agreed. She's too busy being important to care about family anyway. Don't feel bad excluding her. She's used to being alone. My hands were still as I scrolled through the evidence. I didn't gasp, didn't scream, but I felt a pulse in my chest that hadn't been there in days, like breath finding its way back through cracked ribs. So this was the game. They hadn't just left me out. They'd spent years erasing me behind closed doors. I looked at Savannah. They wanted war. Let's start with truth. The morning of the hearing, the sky was gray, not stormy, not bright, just the kind of overcast that makes everything feel muted, like the world's holding its breath. I walked into the courthouse flanked by silence. No entourage, no lawyers in Armani. Just me in a navy dress Grandma once called steel-willed blue, and Mr. Wells carrying a simple portfolio. Inside the courtroom, the air had that distinct sterile chill I remembered from when we settled Grandma's estate. A place where family pretended to be civilized, while the knives stayed tucked under smiles. My mother sat 2 rows ahead, stiffer than usual. Her eyes didn't flicker when I walked in. Trinity was there too, in an all-white pantsuit that looked like it cost a month's rent in Newport. She didn't turn around, but I could see the tension in her shoulders from the way her blazer sat on her back. Nelson, as expected, was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding behind the legal team that sat huddled with my mother and sister. My father, however, was a surprise. He sat alone on the left side of the courtroom, separate from my mother and Trinity, his hands folded in his lap, eyes fixed on the empty judge's bench. He looked older than I remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, his shoulders slightly stooped. The clerk called the case Gellhorn v. Brooks petitioned for injunction against the sale of family real estate under claim of manipulation and elder exploitation. The judge looked up from his notes, adjusted his glasses, and nodded toward Trinity's side. Counsel. Their lawyer stood, slick, young, too smooth for his own good. Your Honor, The petitioner contends that Miss Kaya Gellhorn exploited her father during a time of declining health, resulting in the unauthorized transfer of deed rights to the property in question. He made sure to pause just enough before exploited, like the word had weight. I didn't flinch. I didn't look at my father. I kept my gaze fixed on the judge's desk. And you, Miss Gellhorn, Mr. Wells, stood. Your Honor, we have documentation proving that this property was always intended to transfer to Ms. Gellhorn, per a legally binding agreement signed by all parties 25 years ago. We also have evidence of substantial tax delinquency by the previous owners, which triggers the transfer clause in said agreement. The judge nodded. Proceed. The morning unfolded in a careful dance of accusations and evidence. Their side painted me as a career-obsessed daughter who had abandoned her family and then swooped in to steal their gathering place. Our side methodically presented the original agreement, tax records showing 3 years of delinquency, and the timeline of events. Then came the moment I'd been dreading. The judge called my father to testify. He walked slowly to the stand, his gait steady but hesitant. After being sworn in, Trinity's lawyer approached him like a concerned friend. Mr. Brooks, did you fully understand what you were signing when this alleged agreement was made in 2000? My father cleared his throat. Yes, I did. The lawyer blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. And were you pressured in any way by your mother-in-law at that time? No. My father's voice was quiet but firm. Elizabeth, my mother-in-law, made it clear that her contribution to the house came with the condition that it would eventually go to Kaya. We agreed because we needed her help with the down payment. And yet you never transferred the property to your daughter when she turned 30, as stipulated in the agreement. A pause. No, we didn't. Why not? My father looked down at his hands. Iris, my wife thought it would be better to keep the house in our names, for family use. Kaya had moved to California by then. She had her own life, her own success. So you collectively decided the agreement was no longer relevant. We? He hesitated. We chose to ignore it. The questioning continued, each answer revealing more about the family dynamics than any legal point. When it was Mr. Wells's turn to cross-examine, he approached slowly. Mr. Brooks, were you aware that your daughter was systematically excluded from family gatherings at this property over the past decade? My father's shoulders sagged visibly. Yes. And did you approve of this exclusion? A longer pause. I didn't stop it. One final question. Mr. Brooks, do you contest your daughter's legal right to this property under the agreement you signed? My father looked up then, his eyes finding mine across the courtroom for the first time. No, he said simply. I don't contest it. The house is rightfully hers. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Trinity stood up suddenly, her face flushed, but her lawyer quickly pulled her back down. The judge called for order, then reviewed the documents one final time before looking up. This court finds no basis for the petition. The agreement is valid and binding. The property transfer to Miss Gellhorn stands. He paused, then added with a firm edge, this court is not here to resolve decades of resentment, nor to validate cruelty disguised as tradition. Case dismissed. Trinity froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. My mother stared straight ahead, pale as the collar of her blazer. And my father simply nodded once, as if accepting a truth he'd known all along. I gathered my things and left without looking back. Outside, the media buzzed like flies on honey. Miss Gellhorn, any comment? I turned toward them only once. Sometimes the only way to break a cycle, I said, is to walk away holding your truth. The flash bulbs clicked, but I kept walking down the steps, past the polished marble, onto the sidewalk, and then toward my car parked near the courthouse lawn. There was no applause, no violin soundtrack swelling in the background, just my own quiet steps and a breeze that finally smelled like salt again. As the wind picked up across the dunes, I realized the beach house was never the reward. I was. By the time I pulled into the gravel driveway, the ocean air had already changed saltier, somehow softer, the kind of breeze that didn't just brush against your skin. It reminded you to breathe deeper. I stepped out of the car and stood still for a moment, letting the weight of the last few months fall away, grain by grain. The beach house stood in front of me, sunlit and quiet. For years, I'd driven past it with my eyes turned away. Now the keys in my hand didn't feel like a trophy. They felt like something older, something I'd once lost and had to grow strong enough to deserve again. Inside, the place looked like someone had left in a hurry. A water glass half full on the counter, folded towels still sitting by the staircase. There were picture frames on the hallway wall, photos of Trinity's kids, summer dinners, backyard bonfires I'd never been invited to. I stood there for a moment, hand hovering over one of the frames, but I didn't take it down. I walked past them slowly, my shoes making the kind of hollow sound wood floors always give when a house is holding its breath. Upstairs, the master bedroom was bright, the bed untouched. My name was on the deed, but their fingerprints were still here in the curtains, the leftover shampoo bottles, even the music playlist still loaded on the smart speaker. I let them be. In the office room, once Grandma's, there was a low cabinet drawer I'd avoided touching until now. I sat cross-legged on the floor, slid it open gently, and there it was, the seashell wind chime we'd made when I was 8. It was tangled in fishing line, a few shells cracked, the soft blue string frayed and dusty. One of the painted initials, my K, had worn off entirely. I didn't rush to fix it. I sat with it, turned each piece in my hand like a memory I hadn't let myself touch in years. I could hear her laugh in my head, could almost feel the way she would pause to examine each shell, saying, "Not every broken thing needs to be replaced. Kaya, some things just need a steadier hand." I took it downstairs and laid it across the kitchen table. Thread by thread, I began to repair it. No glue, no shortcuts, just patience and quiet. The sound of the waves through the open screen door became a rhythm, keeping time as I worked. The wind chime didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to ring again. A knock at the door 3 days later surprised me. I tensed instinctively, ready for another confrontation. But when I opened it, my father stood there alone, hands in his pockets, gray hair ruffled by the sea breeze. "Can I come in?" he asked softly. I hesitated, then stepped aside. He walked past me, his familiar cologne sandalwood and something citrusy briefly filling the space between us. He stopped in the living room, looking out at the ocean like he was seeing it for the first time. "I didn't know about the emails," he said finally, still facing the window. "The ones excluding you deliberately." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You didn't ask." He nodded slowly. "I should have." Silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of waves breaking on the shore. "Why did you testify against them?" I asked finally. He turned to face me then. "I wasn't testifying against them. I was testifying for the truth." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. "I've spent too many years avoiding difficult conversations. Kaya, letting your mother and Trinity make decisions I knew weren't right. Like keeping me away." He winced. "Yes, like that." He hesitated. "I was proud of you. You know, every promotion, every achievement. But I was also lost. I didn't know how to connect with the woman you became. It was easier to focus on Trinity and the grandkids." Easier, but not right. I moved to the kitchen, needing some distance, some movement. "Would you like some coffee?" He nodded, following me slowly. Please. As I went through the familiar motions grinding beans, heating water, I felt his eyes on me. Your grandmother knew this would happen someday, he said quietly. I paused, filter in hand. What do you mean? She knew we'd push you away eventually. That's why she insisted on that clause in the agreement. Kaya sees differently, she told me once. She'll need her own sanctuary when the rest of you can't understand her anymore. The coffee machine gurgled, filling the silence between us. Why sell the house now? I asked finally, pouring 2 cups. Why not tell me? He accepted the mug I offered, wrapping both hands around it like he needed the warmth. Money, he admitted. Nelson's latest scheme. Your mother insisted we help him one more time. The house was our only remaining asset with substantial equity. So my brother was worth bailing out, but I wasn't worth including. The bitterness slipped out before I could stop it. My father shook his head. It wasn't about worth, Kaya. It was about convenience. Nelson needed money. Trinity needed validation. Your mother needed to feel needed. And you never seemed to need us at all. I stared at him. I didn't need you to pay my bills or validate my choices. I needed you to love me anyway. He looked away, unable to hold my gaze. I know that now. We sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee, watching the waves. Not healing, not yet, but perhaps finding a place to start. I'm not asking to move back in, he said finally, setting down his empty mug. Your mother and Trinity, they're not ready to talk, might never be, but I'd like to try, to know you again. I didn't rush to answer, didn't offer easy forgiveness. I'm not the same girl who used to build sandcastles with you, I said finally. I don't expect you to be, he replied. I'd just like to meet the woman you've become. When he left, promising to call the following week, I didn't feel triumphant, just quiet, like the moments after a storm passes not yet peaceful, but no longer in turmoil. Later that afternoon, Savannah showed up with a bottle of wine in one hand and a grocery bag in the other. You didn't think I'd let you settle in here without at least some Pinot and paper towels, did you? She smiled. We cleaned in silence for a while, two sisters who'd watched the same family drama unfold from opposite seats. We scrubbed the counter where Trinity once held court with her cheese platters and casual cruelty. We folded blankets that my mother used to keep for special guests, only. The absurdity of it all made me laugh. When we finally settled on the porch with wine glasses in hand, the sun had dipped just enough to color the water rose gold. Savannah turned to me. You didn't just win, Kaya. You undid it. You unhooked yourself from all of it. I didn't answer right away. I was watching a pair of pelicans glide low over the waves, wings outstretched, unbothered. Do you think they'll ever apologize? She asked. I considered this. Mom and Trinity, probably not. Their narrative requires me to be the villain. I sipped my wine slowly. Dad might, in his way, but I'm not waiting for it anymore. A knock came at the gate about an hour later. I tensed instinctively, but it wasn't Trinity or my mother. It was Mrs. Donnelly from 2 houses down, holding a tin of lemon bars. I just wanted to say welcome home, she said. Your father used to talk about you, more than the others. Always said you were the smart one. I blinked. He did? She nodded. Of course. Said you were the one who asked about the tide tables when you were 6. That girl thinks in tides. He told me once. I never forgot that. I stood there, a tin of lemon bars suddenly heavier than anything I'd carried all week. I thanked her and watched her disappear down the walkway. After she left, I hung the wind chime just outside the porch. It swayed gently, catching the breeze like it remembered what it was made for. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. Maybe they'll never apologize. Maybe there'll never be a family dinner where someone says, "You were right," but that's no longer my burden. I'm not waiting for them to fix it or name it or even admit it. I built a life that didn't require their permission. I reclaimed something bigger than a house. I reclaimed my voice and my silence. I didn't burn the bridge. I just stopped begging to cross it. As dusk fell, I turned off the lights room by room. I closed the front door slowly, this time from the inside. The beach house was mine now. Not because I needed to win, but because I finally understood what my grandmother had known all along sometimes. The only family we need is the one we build for ourselves. Shell by broken shell, piece by steady piece. The wind chime sang softly in the evening breeze, its voice clear and true. My voice.